Hello everybody. As I read the comments on YouTube, I realize that by this point I don't need to introduce myself anymore. But let me start with a different kind of introduction this time. Being quite a decent chess player, from time to time I feel disappointed after this kind of games. When people call them boring, not exciting, and yes, indeed, they don't look exciting, they're quiet, the evolution doesn't jump. But quite often it is actually the case that there is quite a deep logic and a lot of sense behind these quiet moves. So in this video I'll try to explain as simple as I can the ideas of the most of the players in today's game, which in my opinion was a very, very good high quality game. So saying that, yeah, this is a recap of game 4, and let's have a look at it. It started with Jan playing 1d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, d5, cd, which is known as the Carlsbad variation. So first of all, little nuances start from the very beginning. One might say, if you want to play it as black, why not to start with 1d5, c4, e6, and then after knight c3 you go knight f6, cd, and you get there anyway. The answer is quite smart. By playing this very nice move order with knight f6, Daniil actually got a very important information that Jan has something in the Nimzo, or at least he's pretending to have it. And the Nimzo you might actually want to play at some point, so this is not groundbreaking, but much more than nothing. Anyway, d5 takes, bishop g5, c6, e3. Daniil played the line with h6, there's also bishop f5, which normally leads to this quite a boring, I must say, ending indeed. There are also plans with bishop e7 instead of c6, but h6 is the main move nowadays. Bishop h4, bishop e7, bishop d3 is reasonable and the only natural move, castles. And here Jan played queen c2. We'll realize later that actually in many of the lines the queen does not necessarily belong to c2. So you might want to play knight j2 here, which is also a very decent move. So if black will do exactly the same, then sometimes, as we will see later, white will avoid playing queen c2. He'll play queen d2 in one go or something else. One of the downsides of knight j2 e2 is that you actually allow knight e4. And the position after bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, let's say bishop takes e4, d takes e4, it also exists, it's very playable and sharp. And in my opinion, knight g2 e2 is a little bit more ambitious move order. Anyway, Jan played queen c2. Yeah, it's also important to understand that you don't play knight f3 here because of knight e4. And then after bishop takes, there is bishop takes h4. And if you take on e7, after queen takes e7, black is in time to protect the knight. So queen c2, black plays rook e8. Once again, if you start with, let's say, knight b to d7, then you don't have knight e4 after knight f3 anymore. So takes, and white just wins the pawn. So the point of rook e8 is actually to keep this option of playing knight e4 after knight f3. Knight g2 e2 is the main move. Knight b to d7. White, Jan played castles. So in general, the way I see it, I've looked at this kind of position for quite long, for basically half a year, is that white normally has 3 plans which he can choose off. So the first one is to play f3 and prevent black from trading these bishops. So you go f3, then at some point you go bishop f2 and you try to play e3, e4. The problem with that plan is that, first of all, if, let's say, here black wants, he can play knight h5, which is what Kramnik played, I guess. And it is also decent. Secondly, let's say castles, let's say knight b7, you go f3 here to have bishop f2 after knight h5. Normally, black goes b5 immediately after that. And then, normally, it is the case that you are just not in time with playing e4. So for instance, if you go e4 here, then there is b4, and there is this tactics that very often works for black. The bishop on h4 is hanging, and if you take, black just takes, and the knight is protected, and it is all good. So it's kind of reasonable to start with castling, But I must say that after f3, b5 castles, a5 is one of the moves, which could transpose to the game, actually. I mean, to one of the deviations from the game. So Jan played castles, and Dink played h5. So to realize what the point of a5 is, we need to start with knight h5, is my impression. So let's say black goes knight h5, we take on e7, queen takes e7. Now there are basically two plans for white. One of them is connected to the play the queen side, which is also called a minority attack. You go rook b1, you go b4, you eventually get b5, and you try to attack the weak pawn on c6. So let's say you go rook b1, black plays something, you go b4, let's say a6, a4, something happens, you go b5, takes, then if black ignores you, you just take on c6 and start playing against this weak pawn. So black normally goes c5, and this is just life. You have some little pressure, but it's not much. Another thing that black can do is actually wise. He can meet the thing not by playing a6 after a4, but by playing a5, let's say here. And in terms of ideas, the difference is that after, let's say, a3, knight f8, b4, takes, he can also play b5. And then eventually he tries to bring his knight to c4. This would not be an option with a pawn on a6, as here, let's say, after a4, if you go b5, then in most of the lines, white will play a5 at some point. And then in 20 moves, the knight will come to c5, and your pawn on e6 is weak. So this is why you don't do this. So a5, which Dink played, is first of all useful these terms. Another plan that you have in this position, instead of rook b1, you can actually prepare f3, e4, which clearly requires protecting the pawn on e3. So normally the way people do it is rook a to e1. Once again, let's say we go for normal knight f8, and then normally what they want is knight c1, which actually happened in the game too. And then some moves, some moves happen. You go knight b3, you go queen f2, you make sure the d4 pawn is not hanging, and then you go e4. Black will normally play c5 at some point, just like in the game. And again, it will be playable. This is also a very decent line, but I'm just trying to show what the ideas are. So Dink plays a5. The point is that first of all, after f3, you can go b5 as well, and this a5 move is actually useful, as it prepares bishop a6 followed by b4. And let's say here, one of the important lines is e4 too, and then you go b4, knight a4, takes, and first of all, knight takes e4 exists here too. Secondly, there is c5. This is one of the lines you need to check as black, but it seems to work. So, saying that, I mean that a5 is actually a useful move against both plans with, f3, e4, and this minority attack. We are stopping b4 in advance. Jan played h3, which seems to be reasonable too. So you basically wait for black to do something, and you say, all right, a3 is actually useful for getting b2, b4. If I'll play with this, minority thing, then most probably a3 and a5 will be equally useful. One of the questions is what happens after rook a to e1. So white is saying I basically wait for knight h5 to happen, and then if you go knight h5, I just take, and I say your a5 is not actually useful versus this f3, e4 thing, which first of all is not necessarily correct, as once as knight will get to b3, black will have a5, a4. Secondly, it could be the case that Dink wanted to play b5 here nevertheless, which you normally don't do with the pawn on f2, not f3, as it weakens the c6 pawn. And with the weak pawn on e3, these things are kind of equal. Here it's not necessarily that good, but on the other hand, white will have to spend in tempi to go rook c1 back and start doing something here. Maybe black is in time with just playing bishop b7, rook c8, b4, and c5 later. This was also reasonable. So Jan played a3, and Dink played knight h5. Takes. So we basically got the position we discussed earlier with this inclusion of the moves a3, a5 played, which it seems to me is actually useful for black. Like the only possible downside I can see is that at some point after, like in the game, after black plays knight f8, some ideas with knight a4, knight b6 jumps will be there, but I mean, I've never felt like it can be a really major issue. So now Jan plays rook a to e1, which is normal, but it exactly lets Dink to show what the point was of this whole thing. So Dink played knight f8, knight c1, knight f6, white played f3. As Jan, I guess by this point, Jan realized that if you do exactly the same, let's say you go knight b3, knight e6, f3, black will play something like, I don't know, b6 or bishop d7. You cannot really go e4, unlike with the pawns on a2 and a7, as there is a4. And then the knight has to go, and you lose the d4 pawn. So it basically means you will have to spend one more time before stopping the thing by playing a3, a4, or doing something else. So he started with f3, probably having this in mind that, yeah, maybe at the end of the day, I'll just avoid playing knight b3. Black went knight e6. Now, as we know, knight b3, which is a transposition, does not create a threat of playing e4 as there is a4. So Jan decided to play knight to e2 instead, which is normal. And here, it was quite an important crossroad for black. Dink played c5, which is a decent move, I guess, completely normal. Another option was playing b5, which again, it's very often the case that once black is in time with b4, this e4 never works. And here, for instance, after e4, b4, okay, you go somewhere, let's say, I don't know, you take, you go knight d1. It's very important that there is queen e7, which once again, we can realize this move would not be there with pawns on a2 and a7. But it's a very important nuance, and white is actually not in time to protect the pawn on d4, and he's just much worse. So b5 was possible. I'm guessing Jan was planning something else. He was planning something like maybe knight a2 is one of the moves the tension likes. Black will just protect the pawn. The game will continue. Most probably, eventually, black will get c5 anyway, and he is more or less fine. So b5 was a decent alternative. Dink played c5, which is in general a very, very thematic reaction to, as the plans with f3. By playing c5, you say, first of all, you never get e4 as d4 is hanging, and secondly, I'm not this worried about this kind of position in general, as with the pawn on f2, I would just have this weak isolated pawn on d5, but in this position, the pawn on e3 is not less weak, they say, as the pawn on d5, so it is all balanced. So after c5, Jan played bishop b5, which, I mean, again, it's not much anyway here for white. One of the decent options here was playing knight f4. I guess it was a little bit more ambitious. And then the point is that if you, let's say, take, then after e takes f4, something like queen f8, you can just take here. It's not that good to take and play d takes c5, as there is queen e3 check, and queen f2 runs into queen takes d3. So you probably start with d takes c5, queen takes c5, queen f2, and this kind of an ending is actually a very, very nice outcome for white. Therefore, knight f4, I think, should be met by something simple like rook d8, protecting the pawn on d5 and asking white what's next. Like, if you go d takes c5 anyways, then I don't really care, I just take back. And if you do something else, then it's not exactly clear what this something else can be. Still, white could try something like queen f2. Black most probably will play another waiting move. And yeah, clearly c takes d4, e takes d4 is a little bit of a concession, but it's a very, very long way to lose a position like this, for instance. You don't need to lose it at all. Still, knight f4 was an interesting try. Jan played bishop b5 instead. Rook d8. Rook d8 is actually a very good sign, I guess, for Dink, as there was nothing wrong with bishop d7. And then what Jan, I guess, wanted is takes, 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 and something like knight d4 here, which is, I mean, okay, you can say it's a little bit more pleasant for white, although I think black is just completely fine, and the engine seems to prove that. You just go rook c8, you go knight e6 at some point. There is nothing wrong with your position, it's just that, I mean, you trade the bishops or you don't. And it's quite nice for Ding that actually he, to me, rook d8 is a sign of some ambitions. You know, you just keep the bishops and you know, to some extent you pretend or indeed you want to play. D takes c5. Okay, what else? If you go bishop b5, then somehow your bishop is stuck there, and it's kind of less natural to play knight f4 with this inclusion as after some, I don't know, queen d6 or something. It's not obvious at all what the bishop is doing on b5. So Jan took on c5, queen takes c5. He played queen d2, which is a good move. By the way, we can see, I told you in the very beginning that actually this queen on c2 is not necessarily a great piece. So quite often it is as the case that eventually you'll have to move it to d2 to protect the pawn on e3. So this is why, going way back, it also makes sense to play knight e2 here, and then if black will do all the same, let's say knight h5, takes, most probably you will not play queen c2, but you'll go queen d2, and then rook e1, knight c1 in one go. Your queen is on d2, e3 is protected. Anyway, it's probably a little too deep to, you know, to think of this for too long, but I'm just trying to show that actually some of the quiet moves are, you know, they have a very deep ideas behind them. By the way, here black starts with knight f8, not knight f6, as after knight f6 there is knight g3. So you go knight f8 first, you wait for the knight from e2 to go to c1, and then you go knight f6 as knight g3 is no longer an option. Alright, so knight e6, knight e2, c5, bishop b5, rook d8, takes, queen d2 was played. Now it was another very interesting moment in terms of psychology as, well, black has bishop d7, which Ding played, and it's completely normal move. But yeah, this breaking through with d5, d4 was also possible, which normally you kind of want to play, right? You have this isolated pawn on d5, you want to get rid of it, and then you say it's a complete symmetry, and I'm just fine. Here exactly though, after e takes, knight takes d4, takes. Now rook takes is not too smart, so you probably go queen takes, white goes rook d1, we trade, and black plays bishop e6. And of course it's very solid, and I mean, as black you don't need to lose this at all. It's like it's only slightly worse, if any. Still, white is a little bit more active here. So let's say you can go rook d6, then you have the ideas with rook b6. Black's position is a little bit passive, although it has to be okay. So let's say you go king f8 after rook b6. In most of the lines you will have this knight d5, and then you take and you play rook c8. Most probably you'll be just fine, and Zenjin says, I mean, of course it is a draw. But Ding played bishop d7, which is once again a very ambitious choice, sort of saying, I don't even want to be tiny worse. Jan played bishop takes d7, which is a little bit inaccurate. So the move here was knight d4. It's not a big surprise that he didn't play it. It's not, you know, something groundbreaking for white. First of all, you need to be a very optimistic person to honestly think that this ending against someone like Ding you can really win. In fact, white is a little bit better. This knight is a very nice square on b5, and after, let's say, rook c8, rook c1, you go king f2. At some point, you maybe take and go knight d6 or something. Basically, this knight is better than the knight on f6, and this is why you keep some little optimism here as white. By the way, rook a6 is probably a better move here to kind of provoke a4 first, and then go rook c6 or something. And of course, I mean, of course, it's very close to a draw, but still, white is a little bit better. The alternative could be rook a to c8, which I think Ding would play, and it's a very decent move, where, you know, it's not much for white at the end of the day. I guess he has to play something like rook c1, knight takes d4. Now, unfortunately for him, he cannot take with the queen as the queen on c5 is now protected by the rook on c8, and there's bishop takes b5 simply. So he has to play e takes d4, queen goes to, let's say, d6, and this is, you know, as close to equality as it can be. Still, I guess if you're given a choice after something like bishop d3, if you're given a choice, you probably take white here. And you know, you play, although you know you don't win this often, to say the least. Still, technically, this was a better attempt. Jan took on d7 instead. And yeah, Ding came up with this brilliant move, knight takes d7, which looks counterintuitive, but it's actually very good. So let's say if we take with the rook, our knights are passive, and in fact this knight is restricted very well by this pawn on f3. And then let's say you go, I mean, you can start with rook d1, you can even play knight d4 and something like this. You can, you know, pretend to play, you go rook e5, you double on the e file, like there is not much to attack in black's position, but at least your pieces are more active and you know, you are hoping for things to happen. So therefore, Ding played knight takes, which turns out to be a brilliant move. So first of all, it's not a sacrifice at all. After queen takes d5, there is queen takes c3 check, and then you play whatever you want. I don't know, knight c5, queen b6 back, anything. And after knight takes d5, there is knight b6, and you cannot really protect the knight. There is no e4 as this pawn is pinned. So it's not a sacrifice, and black is planning knight b6 or knight e5 followed by knight c4, which kind of highlights the weakness of white pawns on a3 and b2. Once again, it would be way less problematic for white with the pawns on a2 and a7, and then he just goes b3, and this knight is not going anywhere. But now after b3, a3 is hanging in every single line. So this is why, once again, I'm saying this inclusion of a5 and a3 favors black a little in many of the lines. So after knight takes d7, Jan realized he is not better at all anymore, and in fact it's black who can start to, you know, have some little optimism about this game. Jan played knight d4. Jan actually played a very good sequence of moves here, which basically secures him from any danger. Knight b6, the knight is coming to c4. Rook d1, another good move. Knight c4, queen f2. Very good calculation for Jan here. I mean, again, like in the game, it was rook c8, and you think, okay, but they play solid moves and so on. Actually, to play the sequence, you need to calculate knight takes a3. And the problem with knight takes a3 is that white has this nice idea of playing e3 to e4. And then you basically want the d5 pawn. So if something like knight c4 happens, you just take on d5, most probably with a knight, I guess. And if black takes on d4, you just capture back. And again, there is no way for black to save the pawn on d5. Clearly, you cannot do this. So basically, by the smart e3, e4 idea, white is just, you know, getting his pawn back, which is not, you know, too obvious when you look at this just rook d1, queen f2 thing. Ding saw it too, it seems, so he played rook a to c8, increasing the pressure. Now it's only knight takes, not only knight takes a3 that can be an idea, but also knight takes b2. So Jan played knight a4, queen e7. Queen e7 is logical, like it's either e7 or a7. I guess after queen a7, what Ding was worried about is knight f5, which makes a lot of sense. Knight e7 check is coming, and suddenly if you go b5, then there is knight c3, and the pawn on d5 is actually quite weak. So Ding played queen e7 instead. Now, like in all the lines with knight f5, you have queen f6. So Jan played rook f to e1, simply to have knight takes d4, rook takes d4 with the pawn on e3 protected by the rook. Ding played queen f6, which was technically, from the engine's point of view, is a little mistake. So the best try here was knight takes d4. Now e takes queen f6 is symmetrical, but quite a lot better for black. Like anything you can compare is actually better for him. His knight is better placed. Rook e8 is coming. Also, this setup with the pawn on f3 is way more weakening the king than the one with the pawn on h6. if queen takes d4 ever happens, it will be a check. There is some rook e8 and potentially queen g5, knight e3 or something. So black is better here. So you need to play rook takes d4, b5, knight c3, once again attacking this d5 pawn, queen c5 back. And now knight takes b2 or knight takes c3 are threats. Also b4 is coming. White has few ways to make a draw here, but black is pressing somewhat. So let's say one of the lines here goes b4. Black plays queen c6. It's important not to take as you want this h3 pawn to be hanging all the time. Then white plays, what does he actually play? He plays, I guess, rook e to d1. We take on e3, queen takes. Now, if you take on c3, then this is just a dead draw. 3 against 3, you're not going to win. So one little attempt here is rook e8, where white has to come up. I mean, okay, it's not lost pretty much whatever you do, but the most precise way is knight e4, takes, b takes a5, takes, takes, and after all the exchanges, if black is really lucky, he will get something like this rook ending 3 against 2, which is a dead draw, and you don't even really try to win at this level. Still, it would require some precision from Jan. Dink played queen f6 instead, which looks reasonable too. Like, you keep the pressure, you prevent all the jumps with knight f5, and now you want to play maybe knight takes d4 followed by b5 at some point. But Jan played this very nice move, knight b5, stopping the whole knight takes d4 idea forever. And they repeated moves after knight c7, knight c3, knight e6, which was, again, reasonable. To amateur players, sometimes it just feels like both didn't want to play, And I mean, you can see that there is like a big number of moves with 0, 0, 0 evil, and you think, okay, they didn't want to play, but how to play? So let's say you take. One of the reasonable lines was this one, takes, takes, knight c3. But then black has knight takes b2, knight takes d5, and he simply plays queen, I guess, e5. Or maybe not e5. But even queen e5 should be good, maybe queen g5 as well. So something like this happens. And I mean, it's a draw, but if someone is better, it's black, clearly. Same with Ding. So let's say here you can try something else. Like, for instance, there was this move, I guess, b5. But then white will simply go to c3. And again, after, let's say, b4 takes, takes, knight a2. It's not that you're much worse, but it's not clear what you're doing exactly. Like, this pawn is weak. White will just play knight c1, knight b3, or d3 if he will need it. And once again, if anyone is better, if someone is better, it's white. So this is why they finished the game like this, which I think left us with, yes, it was not exciting. It was not long either, but it was a very, very, I think, good, high-quality game, which I liked a lot. I think, like, by far, this is Ding's best game in the match. So we'll see what happens next, but my impression was that Ding is actually back. He's not going to give up. And tomorrow we'll find out if he manages to put some pressure with white. See you guys tomorrow.